I once believed in love and happy marriages. Kenneth made me feel safe with his kind words. "You don't have to work. I'll take care of everything," he had promised. His confidence made me say yes to his proposal. But after marriage, everything changed. He and his son Matthew treated me like a servant. They insulted me every day, controlled all the money, and never cared about my feelings. I felt trapped in a life I didn't choose. The day I finally left, I promised myself I would never let them control me again, and I would make them regret it. Months later, I saw Matthew on the street. He smirked and said, "Heard you're living off government help now." His arrogance made me laugh. He had no idea how well I was doing. I didn't correct him. Instead, I let him believe his lies. Soon, reality would hit him, and I would be there to watch. As he walked away, I shook my head. Kenneth and Matthew had thought they could treat me badly and never face consequences. But life doesn't work that way. Their time was coming, and I couldn't wait to see their reaction when they found out the truth. 5 years ago, when I met Kenneth, he seemed like a perfect man. He was charming, funny, and kind. He told me about his job and his son Matthew. "He's a great kid," Kenneth said. At first, that seemed true. Matthew was polite and friendly. I thought we could be a happy family, but I was wrong. As soon as we got married, their behavior changed. Kenneth became cold, and Matthew started treating me badly. I was no longer a wife. I was a maid. The love and kindness I once saw were just an illusion. I had walked into a trap. The insult started small. "Are you just going to sleep all day?" Matthew would say if I was feeling sick. Kenneth would roll his eyes and say, "Being a housewife must be nice." They controlled all the money. Kenneth refused to let me manage our finances. "It's my salary," he said. "Why should you have a say?" I trusted him, thinking it didn't matter. But soon I had to ask for permission to buy even small things. He laughed when I asked for a haircut. "Why do you need to look good?" he said. "Who do you think you are?" The worst moment came when my father died. I asked Kenneth if we could send flowers for the funeral. He frowned and said, "Why waste money on that?" Even Matthew complained that attending the funeral would ruin his weekend. I felt my heart break. I had given my life to these people, and they didn't even care about me. That night, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I knew I had to leave, but with no job, no savings, and nowhere to go, I felt stuck. How could I escape from this nightmare? Then, everything started to change. Kenneth spent money on expensive suits and watches, saying they were necessary for work. But when I asked for a little extra to buy fresh vegetables, he got angry. "A housewife doesn't need luxuries," he snapped. Meanwhile, Matthew refused to eat the food I made. He wanted restaurant-quality meals, even though we were on a tight budget. But then Kenneth got sick. His health check showed he was pre-diabetic. Matthew gained weight. Instead of taking responsibility, they blamed me. "You made us sick," Kenneth shouted. That was the last straw. It was time to leave. When I told Kenneth I wanted a divorce, he laughed. "You won't survive without me," he sneered. But he was wrong. While he was busy controlling me, I had been building something for myself. I had started a cooking blog, sharing budget-friendly recipes. People loved it, and soon, I started making money. "I'll be fine," I told him. His smirk disappeared. "You're just a housewife," he scoffed. "You have nothing." I didn't argue. I packed my bags and walked out. They thought I would come crawling back. But my life was about to get better, and theirs was about to crumble. Days after I left, Kenneth called. "You have no proof of mistreatment," he said. "You won't get anything from me." I calmly replied, "I kept a journal. I wrote down every insult, every time you refused to give me money, everything." He went silent. Then he shouted, "You're lying!" But he knew it was true. Then, I hired a private investigator and discovered something even better. Kenneth was having an affair with a woman from work. With one email, I sent the proof to his company. The next day, Kenneth lost everything: his job, his reputation, and his pride. Matthew, on the other hand, continued spending money like nothing had changed. But soon, he realized there was no more money left. One day, he called me furious. "You tricked us!" he screamed. "You had money all along?" I sighed. It was my father's inheritance. None of it belonged to Kenneth. He stammered, realizing I had outsmarted them. This isn't fair, he whined. You should have given Dad some of it. I laughed. Why? He never gave me a penny. Matthew was speechless. For the first time in his life, he had to face the consequences of his actions. Kenneth's life quickly fell apart. After losing his job, he had no savings to fall back on. He had spent all his money on expensive suits, watches, and an affair that ended badly. With no income, he was forced to rely on government help, the very thing he used to mock others for needing. Meanwhile, Matthew's perfect life also crumbled. His friends left him, his weight increased from his unhealthy lifestyle, and he could barely afford rent. One day he called me, shouting, "You ruined our lives!" I laughed. No, Kenneth and you ruined your own lives. I just walked away. Months later, they showed up at my mother's house uninvited. Kenneth looked tired and thin, his once expensive clothes now wrinkled. Matthew, usually well-dressed, had lost his shine. "Hannah, let's get back together," Kenneth said with a smirk. "I'll even let you work this time." Matthew nodded. "Mom, we need you." I almost laughed. The same people who had treated me like trash were now begging me to return. I shook my head. "No," I said calmly. "I will never go back to you." Their faces twisted with anger, but I stood my ground. This time I was in control. Kenneth clenched his fists. "You think you're better than us now?" he snapped. "You got lucky with your father's money." Matthew crossed his arms. "You're rich and selfish. Why can't you help us?" I sighed. "You mocked me when you thought I had nothing. Now that you're the one struggling, you expect me to fix your mess?" Kenneth smirked. "You can't live alone forever. One day you'll regret this." I met his eyes and smiled. "No, Kenneth. The only ones who will regret anything are you two." That was the moment they realized I wasn't afraid of them anymore. Just then, my mother entered the room. She glanced at Kenneth and Matthew with a sharp look. "You have no shame," she said firmly. "You insulted my daughter, took advantage of her, and now you dare to ask for help?" Kenneth tried to speak, but she cut him off. "You two weren't even respectful at my husband's funeral, and now you want his money?" Her voice was cold. "Get out of my house." Kenneth and Matthew looked shocked. "Mom, please," Matthew started, but she didn't let him finish. "If you ever come here again, I'll call the police." Kenneth and Matthew had no choice but to leave. After that day, Kenneth gave up looking for a new job. His wealthy relatives, embarrassed by his behavior, refused to help him. He moved back to the countryside, where people mocked him for losing his job and both wives. Even a big salary couldn't keep his family, they whispered. Matthew, once a promising student, got expelled for failing his classes. Without friends, money, or a future, he barely survived on part-time jobs. The life they once looked down on became their reality. Meanwhile, I was living the life they thought I'd never have. With my divorce behind me, I focused on my success. My cooking website became more popular, and my book became a bestseller. I moved into one of the luxury apartments my father left me. My life was peaceful, full of things I had never experienced before: happiness, freedom, and self-respect. No one controlled my money, my choices, or my future anymore. My mother, still healthy at 73, lived nearby, and we spent time together often. I had lost years to a toxic marriage, but I had gained something more valuable: a life that was truly mine. One day, as I planned a surprise vacation for my mother's birthday, I sat by my window, sipping tea, and smiled. Kenneth and Matthew had tried to control me, break me, and destroy my happiness. But in the end, they only destroyed themselves. Karma had taken care of everything. I didn't need revenge. Life had done it for me. I had survived. I had thrived. And most importantly, I had won.